It is no secret at this point that I am a fan of Crushers. However, that doesn't mean that I am unaware of their criticisms. If anything, I should be the most aware of them, as someone who has come to their defense on multiple occasions, since apparently they can't defend themselves. The most common criticism of Crushers is a very simple one. They completely lack defense. Now, this is justified, as an operator that completely lacks defense will suffer when it comes to physical damage-based survivability. If you want to take advantage of a Crusher's splash damage, then typically you'll want to put them against hordes of small peons. However, since smaller enemies tend to have faster attack rates and tend to be in swarms, Crushers are often overwhelmed when it comes to instances of damage taken, and since they lack defense to negate each of these many instances, they end up losing their rather massive HP pools quite quickly. However, this is actually a misconception of how Crushers are to be used. You shouldn't actually be using Crushers like this, as Crushers aren't meant to be used as Uber Centurions, but rather as Uber Dreadnoughts, or as Crushers. I can't blame people for assuming the latter though, as Crushers are quite a counterintuitive subclass. Crushers as an archetype were designed with a top-down philosophy in mind, that being to implement flavor into the operator before properly defining a functionality. When designing an operator purely around the fact that they do indeed have a great sword, and it is very heavy, hypergryphs seem to have a few things in mind. Great swords are heavy and very big, which means that if you swing one, you will probably hit someone else. And so, because of that, Crushers gain splash damage. However, you can't really implement splash damage on an operator with one block, so Crushers naturally had to gain a second one. Greatswords are, as said earlier, heavy and very big, and assuming that you get hit with one in the head and somehow did not die, you would probably suffer a major concussion, or at least major head trauma. This was implemented into the weird theme of all three Crushers inflicting stun. Now, neither of these factors properly define Crushers as a subclass, as most of their usage is purely based in their sheer stats, rather than whatever the fuck Hypergryph was cooking. This doesn't necessarily mean that these factors don't have use. There really isn't a downside to having a skill that inflicts stun or having them give splash damage. If anything, it's more useful than not. However, this weird clashing identity with Crushers, focusing on things that don't really have anything to do with what the subclass is supposed to do, leads to a mismanagement with how these operators are designed. Quartz's S2, for example, is purely focused on the stun rather than helping her HP-based survivability or increasing her instance damage output. This means that she's left with the default skill that actually does stuff and a very niche skill that doesn't properly work with her subclass. Wind Chimes is much better, as her stun is more of a bonus to her S2's nuke rather than as the main selling point of the skill. Hodor, on the other hand, does basically everything that a Crusher should do when it comes to their subclass. His S1 helps with his massive HP pool, keeping him alive with percentage-based healing, as well as increasing his hefty instance damage output. His S2 makes the Crusher's stun more consistent, giving him actual usage for crowd control, and his S3 being a concatenation of any 6-star S3, consisting of random overpowered bullshit with very negligible downside. Back to Quartz though. As a baseline operator, she is responsible for upholding the proper subclass identity to help new players understand how Crushers are supposed to work. Issue is, Hypergryph didn't understand what Crushers really were until they designed Wind Chimes. As much as Quartz is a fun operator, she isn't designed well to represent Crushers as a subclass, and since she is the introduction to the subclass for most people, she is mainly responsible for the bad experiences people often cite their distaste of Crushers. As mentioned earlier, yes, Crushers do suffer from a lack of defense, but this only really comes up in one situation, when dealing with spam. Other than that, Crushers actually have pretty decent survivability. When putting them up against moderate attack enemies, typically they will hold their own pretty well due to their massive HP pool. The thing is with Crushers is that the survivability against physical damage is really weird and kinda backwards. When you think of an operator with pretty good physical damage survivability, like Quora, you typically see them as operators who can deal with any amount of damage except the heaviest of hits. This is because their effective HP is linked to the damage they reduce from their defense. So if an operator like Quora is taking loads of petty damage, reducing it by 95% since it doesn't overcome her defense, she ends up with an absurd effective HP. To put this into perspective, let's look at Quora. At Elite 2 level 40, she has 2700 HP and 796 defense. I'm not going to count her module here since it's an unfair comparison to the Crushers, who don't currently have their module. If she was going up against an enemy with 500 attack, she would only take 25 damage per attack. This means that she will have to tank 108 hits until she falls. This effectively gives her 54,000 HP, since she took 500 attack worth of damage 108 times. Now, let's change the attack value. Instead of 500 attack, let's say 2000 attack. Against an enemy with 2000 attack, Quora takes 1204 damage per attack. This means that she will tank 3 hits before she falls. She tanks 3 hits worth of 2000 attack, giving her an effective HP of 6000. As you can see, the higher the attack value, the lower the effective HP. Operators that are reliant on defense as their main source of survivability have an inconsistent effective HP. Now, for an operator like Kaora, this doesn't matter too much as long as you aren't dealing with absurdly large attack enemies. Plus, she does have her S1 and S2, which boosts her defense. With that in mind, let's look at Quartz, also at Elite 2 level 40. Quartz has 5277 HP, as well as no defense. No matter the attack value of the target, her effective HP will always be however many shots she can naturally tank. Against an enemy with 500 attack, she can tank 11 shots, giving her an effective HP of 5500. Against an enemy with 2000 attack, she can tank 3 shots, giving her an effective HP of 6000. Yeah, in a weird way, Quartz has more effective HP against higher attack targets due to overkill damage. If Quartz dies in 2 hits to 5,000 damage, she technically had 10k effective HP. As you can see, Quartz vastly underperforms in situations against lower attack targets, but is on par with defenders when it comes to higher attack targets. Obviously, she isn't meant to be a replacement for your defenders, but can often function as a boss staller or a picker for really heavy hitting targets. Of course, this isn't just assuming that we're dealing with physical damage, as, fun fact, there are 3 whole damage types in Arknights that don't give a shit about defense: arts damage, elemental damage, and true damage. When dealing with these damage types, the main measure of an operator's survivability is their HP. Albeit, resistance can help you out against arts damage, but unless it's an absurdist case like with a good Guardmia S2 or Nightingale, resistance is more of a bonus against arts damage than an actual metric. So against arts damage, Quartz's defense is irrelevant, meaning that her effective HP, like Quartz's, stays static, remaining at her max HP of 2700. Since Quartz is almost double that at 5277, Quartz can tank almost double the amount of arts damage as Kaora. However, Kaora isn't built for arts damage, so let's instead compare Quartz to Matterhorn. Matterhorn at Elite 2 level 40 has 3448 HP and 20 resistance, which gives him 4137 effective HP against arts damage. Quartz at 5277. This isn't meant to show that Crushers are secretly busted. Unlike Matterhorn and Kaora, she completely lacks defensive abilities. It's more to show you that you can use Crushers as an offensive blocker that can tank a good amounts of certain kinds of damage, that being high instance physical damage or non-physical damage. The biggest issues with Crusher's survivability isn't their lack of defense, but more how difficult it is to keep them healthy. Since Crushers don't have defense to mitigate high amounts of damage, or self-heal skills, with the exception of Hoderer, this means that all of the damage they take needs to be healed. This means they are quite difficult for your medics to keep up with, so you have to employ a different approach. Gavial, 2, and Warfarin are probably the best medics for keeping your Crushers alive. All 3 of them have skills that boost their healing when the target is below 50% HP. Even at 50% HP, your Crushers have more HP than most operators in the game, meaning you have a safe buffer for healing between 0% and 50%. This can create a sort of equilibrium effect, where the higher damage that Crushers take is offset by the higher healing they'll receive from these medics. But maybe you don't really want to worry about healing numbers. Instead, you could just mitigate the main downside of Crushers, their complete lack of defense. This may be a bit difficult to manage, but this combo is really helpful when it comes to keeping your Crushers alive. Shining is a 6-star operator who grants a flat defense increase to all operators in her range, a bonus applied to ground targets. With her Chi module, she could grant a Crusher a total of 145 defense, which may not be that much, but can do a good job at mitigating a large amount of damage swarms can do to your Crushers. Editing bloop here. Apparently the defense boost that Shining gives actually affects the base defense of the operator, which means that it can be buffed with percentage effects. So you could use Shining's S3 to basically double the defense boost that Shining would give to your Crushers, meaning that you can give your Crushers a hell of a lot more defense than what I say in the video. Defense inspiration boosts given by bards, such as Skady the Corrupting Heart and Heidi, are also flat boosts, meaning your Crushers can reach even higher defense values during their skill up times. You can also use Bison's talent for an extra 70 defense, stack these boosts together, and you can have yourself a 434 defense Crusher. Heidi in this case giving the larger inspiration, meaning only hers applies. Keep in mind though, this can't be boosted further by percent increases, as percentage increases boost based off of base stats, not current stats. So yeah, their survivability is kinda jank, but has some niche applications. You can definitely do what you can to improve on it, as it's the only real downside of the Crusher subclass. They won't ever be as good as actual tanks, but that's because they're not tanks, they're hybrid attackers. Along with their absurd HP, Crushers have the highest base attack out of any other subclass in the game. However, people will often say that it's because of their slow attack speed that they end up with poor DPS, which isn't incorrect. If you look at base Quartz and Matoi Maru, Quartz has 1604 attack with a 2.5 second attack interval. Matoi Maru has 916 attack with a 1.5 second attack interval. This gives Quartz 641 DPS, while Matoi Maru has 610... Franka has 1041 attack with a 1.5 second attack interval, giving her 694 DPS, which is vastly higher than Quartz's DPS by 50. Wait, I thought it was a lot bigger than that. People have been saying that Crushers have bad DPS, but they're quite on par with Dreadnoughts. What? I mean, okay. People often compare Crushers to Centurions, since they both do splash damage, I guess, and have 2 block. So what about Spectre? Spectre has 832 attack and a 1.2 second attack interval, giving her 693 DPS, which, again, a total of 50 DPS more than Quartz. And Wind Chimes has 755 DPS and max HP, but okay, but seriously, although Crushers have similar DPS to other operators they are often compared to, they also don't have modules, meaning that when taking into account modules, Matoi, Mario, and Spectre do end up with more DPS. Even then, I don't really think Crushers have low DPS. Honestly, I don't even know where this criticism came from, especially since they are comparable to operators like Matoi, Mario, and Spectre. If it's because they don't have the same DPS as Chen the Holding Day or Texas the Omertosa, then that's a whole nother can of worms. The thing is though, this DPS calculation is only when dealing with enemies with exactly 0 defense, which isn't always accurate. If you were to assume that the enemy has, I don't know, 500 defense, the numbers are far different. Spectre deals 332 damage, Franka doing 541, thus giving them 276 DPS and 360 DPS respectively. Quartz, on the other hand, deals 1,104 damage, leading to 441 DPS. Pushes up to 1,000 defense, and both Spectre and Franka get damage thresholded, while Quartz is still doing 604 damage per attack for 241 DPS. And that's the kicker. Although Crushers do have a bit less DPS against enemies with no defense, they have much larger DPS when dealing with enemies with higher defense. This is because Crushers focus on slower yet more powerful attacks. This means their DPS is far less hindered by defense, since defense is linear when it comes to damage reduction. This makes Crushers really good when it comes to dealing with enemies with both high defense and resistance, as brute force physical damage approach can deal with higher defense enemies pretty well. This is typically why you'll often see me use Quartz's S1 over her S2. I'd rather give Quartz more attack than attack speed, as a % increase in attack is not always the same % increase in damage. Let's say my Quartz is dealing with the same heavy defender leader from earlier who has 1,000 defense. Quartz has 1,604 attack, so she deals 604 damage. However, if I activate her S1, attack up beta, this will increase her attack by 80%. Quartz goes from 1,604 attack to 2,887 attack, meaning she now deals 1,887 damage to the heavy defender leader. An 80% attack increase was really a 212 increase in damage output. Now, this isn't something that's exclusive to Crushers. Any physical damage subclass is going to take advantage of these rules. This is why operators like Cruz, Doberman, or Arado seemingly deal a shit ton of damage out of nowhere on crits. However, since it is very in line with the Crusher's subclass identity, optimizing this damage output is very important to the class. Same thing applies with Wind Chimes' S2. Even if you aren't a huge supporter of the Crusher subclass, I'm sure you've gotten some usage out of her purely for the pure power of her S2. Wind Chimes' S2 at full charge increases her attack by 50%, then dealing 230% of attack as physical damage to all enemies in a large line in front of her. Wind Chimes has 1,548 attack, pushed further to 1,857 while at max HP. At max charge, her S2 deals an insane 6,408 damage, which can act as an absolute nuke to even enemies with the highest defense values. A lot of this is, of course, using the highest possible numbers available, so such numbers may not be possible depending on what levels, potentials, and trust you have your operators at. Regardless, the logic is still there. Crushers excel when it comes to dealing physical damage to higher defense enemies, usually being pretty good options when dealing with mixed enemies or when dealing with high defense enemies that you can't really use arch damage against. However, this all leaves us with a very good question. What is the point of all of this? I didn't make any points for why Crushers are good, I just explained how they're supposed to be used. They have a pretty significant downside and really niche use cases. Hell, they're pretty replaceable most of the time. If you want a guard with good survivability and attack, then use Matoi Maru. Her self-heal does wonders compared to a fixed HP pool. If you want to overcome high defense, you're probably better off just using arts damage anyways. If you're required to use physical damage, then maybe a good Franka proc or two can be helpful. Hell, why are we even limiting ourselves to rarity? You want an immovable operator, use Surtur. Want to demolish high defense targets? Use Kaobei or Typhon. Use Chen the Holding Day. Use the operators you have been constantly told to use, because there's a reason why all these operators are constantly praised. Unlike crushers, they have no inherent downside. It is purely upside. A 4-year-old could use these operators to succeed. Why the hell would I even want to teach you guys how to use crushers? There is literally no fucking reason to ever use them. Well, because that's what's awesome about them. To me, I like treating Arknights like a card game, like Magic the Gathering or Yu-Gi-Oh! A game with all these different pieces that can be put together to make a cool combo or strategy. An operator like Quartz is like one with nothing. A card with seemingly no upsides whatsoever. A card that does nothing but hinder you on your road to success. A card with a game-winning 2-card combo. To me, the fun of Arknights isn't just breezing through content, it's about how I go about clearing said content. I don't just limit myself because I'm a niche sweat. I don't mainly limit myself because I'm a niche sweat, but because it's fun to try out new things and to understand operators that most people don't really care about. I see nothing wrong with comboing certain operators together in order to make up for an operator's downside. Hell, that's just how the game works. Beagle isn't going to be your main DPS. She's a tank, so you gotta have something beside her to help with damage. So let's put down Cruz. Cruz is pretty good at dealing damage, so she should help make up for Beagle's downside. But both Beagle and Cruz can't deal with arts damage, so let's throw down Steward to help the two of them out. To me, this isn't much different than a Shining Quartz combo or a Quartz 2 combo. The whole point of the game is to work with what you have, putting together pieces of the puzzle to make things work. Yeah, crushers may not be the best for the job most of the time, but to me, I find enjoyment in making them work. I don't care if the way I beat a stage is optimal, I just care if it works. The fun comes from pulling off your weird one with nothing and Baron Glory combo. I don't think Quartz is as bad as one with nothing, she is far, far better. But you get the idea. What matters isn't necessarily the operator, but how you use them. There are no bad operators, just players who have already given up on trying. Thank you all for watching. I hope you have an amazing day. I love you all.